We're going down a rabbit hole. We're going through the looking glass. We're going into conspiracy land. And there are so many conspiracy theories millions of Americans believe to be true, such as these from one polling organisation. 29% apparently believe that voting machines were programmed to change votes in the 2020 election. And 41% saying there is a single group of people who secretly control events and rule the world together. Marianna, we are in your world.
I know. You're my world that you try very hard to not have to be involved in. Yeah. We're going to be spending today's podcast talking all about conspiracy theories, how they unfold, what they mean, who they affect, who's getting sucked into them, and why this actually matters, because it's not just a fringe, quirky other thing anymore. It does have a real world impact, particularly, I think, when we're talking about this election and what it could mean or what it doesn't mean when that election is a very, very close one. Welcome to Americast, Down the Rabbit Hole.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide secret headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it's Marianna, aka Misinformation, also in the not so secret world headquarters, because I can't be bothered for loads of people to then tweet that we are part of the cabal, which they definitely will.
Yeah, and that, of course, doesn't matter, but these things do, and I suppose that's what we're going to get to today, because in a sense, I mean, you know, you report on all these things with very good humour, Marianna, but it does have a real world impact.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the questions that I'm really interested in chatting to Americasters about today and that we'll be talking about is the way I think we've often thought of the election as being something that unfolds on social media, almost like it's happening in the real world and then it happens online and we watch how it unfolds there and how voters are targeted. Whereas for me, it now almost happens kind of the other way round. Like the election rather, might be all over our feeds, but what's happening on social media is constantly shaping and affecting what's happening during the campaign, and also what's affecting voters and what they believe and don't believe, and then the decisions they make about who to vote for and how to behave. And I think that that's why we should be talking about this, because you kind of have to enter the social media world to better understand how everyone outside of it, the people that use it and the people who don't, are being affected.
And it's new. I mean, it wasn't like this. And then looking at the American election 4 years ago, 8 years ago, certainly longer than that ago, it just wasn't the same.
Yeah, and I think as well, you know, sometimes people think, oh, it's just like adverts, or it's just kind of, oh, it's just a new tool that campaigns can use to reach voters, social media, and that's cool and interesting. But actually, there's something else at play here, which is you know, there's so much content that exists on social media that is created by people who are not the campaigns, who are supporters, who are followers of particular ideas or political groups. Lots of that's a positive thing. It means people can make their voices heard about what's going on in the United States. The flip side of that is that people can share disinformation, hate, stuff that's not true, stuff that's kind of a bit true but not quite true, stuff that could cause harm to someone else. And not just that, but algorithms, the systems that recommend us stuff on the sites, are pushing some people deeper into a world that feels quite detached from reality. Yeah. And not just the people you think of, but actually people who are being exposed to this stuff who've never believed anything like it before.
Yes, people like us.
People like us.
No, I mean, it's a really interesting, because you were educating me about algorithms. We were having conversations some time ago, and I was thinking about it.
I was very impressed when it then appeared on the Today programme.
No, I've been using it ever since. But it is really interesting because it's the impact that has on our political decision making. I mean, we're quite interested. We're obsessed, actually, at the impact that social media has on children, and we're worried about it, and that's a big topic of conversation. But I'm not sure we have focused that much on what those algorithms do to our political selves and the decisions we make and the kind of thoughts that we have about politics.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to this question of where we take our cues from socially. So if we're being recommended posts that have millions of views from people who share our opinions and who we're inclined to trust as a consequence, then what effect can that have at distorting our perception of reality or dragging us into certain ideas in certain places we might otherwise not have encountered? There are positives to that. You see stuff, you encounter people and videos and content that might actually be interesting and take you somewhere and make you reflect on something you wouldn't have thought about before. But overwhelmingly, what I find is that people are being exposed to stuff they wouldn't have sought out. Yeah. And then that is shaping what they think in a way that often can be peppered with disinformation, which can then trigger kind of people behaving in a really hateful way, sending threats, for example, because they truly believe in the kinds of theories that are being pushed out. And I find at the moment, if I'm honest, that almost everything I investigate, not just like the social media backdrop to this election, the presidential one, but actually how kids are affected online, what happened in the UK with the riots over the summer, they all come back to the same thing, which is about algorithms prioritizing engagement over safety or over what is not going to perhaps cause harm to other people. And that is just at the heart of this, really, and is something that I think we're going to get into.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get into your visits to America and what you've been doing and the series that's come out of it.
So I have been out and about in Colorado, Baltimore, New York for Why Do You Hate Me USA? The tagline, as I've just sort of described, is it's social media's world and the election's just living in it. To misquote Barbie. Misquote Barbie. It's actually sort of a TikTok trend, but people kind of know Barbie better. So I'll say it's Barbie, but it's actually a TikTok trend where people say like it's blah blah's world, and like you might say it's your dog Kobe's world, and everyone's just living in it. That sort of thing.
That's what he thinks.
Exactly. Well, that's what social media thinks now. So all of this series is investigating different social media phenomena, the online backdrop to the election, and how they are shaping what's unfolding. Everything from conspiracy theories and extreme threats and hate, doxing relating to the war in Gaza and the Hamas attacks on Israel, the Swifties and the fandoms and the impact that those could have on the election, AI clips and how they fractured a community. So a whole range of different things. But the first 2 episodes, which are available now, are very much delving into conspiracy land. And so no better guest that we could have today than someone else who loves talking
Just
about
as well, because this is the only
theories.
guest we've got today. But
So
no best.
we're sitting next to Gabriel Gatehouse,
Hello.
who is the presenter of The Coming Storm, which investigates the proliferation of American conspiracy culture, how it happened and who's behind it. I don't know where we want to start, Justin. I feel like we could very much
I mean,
wiggle down the rabbit hole.
Jump
Yeah,
straight in.
Gabriel's been doing
You have to
this
pull
for
me
so
out,
long.
in fact.
I want to start with where you've gone on your own journey down a rabbit hole since you left Newsnight, where you were international editor, and just doing the kind of conventional TV stuff about kind of conventional news in a way and international affairs and all the rest of it, and now into a completely new world.
I don't think it is that different, really. I mean, I don't. Essentially, what you're doing when you're telling any kind of a story on whether it's Newsnight, a kind of conventional news program, or a long-running series, podcast series, you're trying to understand where something's coming from and what it means, and present it in such a way as that it makes a coherent story. What I would say is that trying to make The Coming Storm, which is trying to make sense of conspiracy theories, the really weird thing about it is that I've ended up kind of, what you're trying to do is make connections between things across time and space. So, I was talking about the FDR and the Fed and 1933 and the Cold War, and you're trying to pull these threads together and see if you can discern some currents and patterns in history that help you understand that. What else does that sound like to you, Marianna?
A conspiracy.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So you've got to be so careful that you don't
use
fall
their
into...
methods to...
Right.
Yeah.
Because, making connections is a good thing and a healthy thing, can help you understand the world, but it can also lead you into places where you're seeing causality where none exists, right?
You made the connections in the first series of The Coming Storm. In the second, what happens? Do you unravel them? Do you go further down them?
We go further down. I mean, we go further back in history, and we go further forward, and we also look. So one of the differences, it's so interesting listening to I've listened to your first 2 episodes, and I love them, and it's really interesting hearing the kind of, in a way, I feel relieved hearing this, because I feel like, this idea of things being staged and set up, that was such a big theme in the people we were talking to. So I'm kind of feel like,
It's
good,
like
we're on the right track.
Yeah, it's like this sort of full circle.
But what's interesting is that your jumping off point is very much social media, the social media world. And my jumping off point is by and large not social media. It's the real world. In fact, we're looking into the real, quote unquote, real world. I mean,
Yeah, it's
online,
all
the internet
world.
is the real world.
Yeah.
but we're looking in many instances at things that existed long before the internet was invented, right? So, but there is so much crossover there that I wonder. Obviously, the internet has fueled a lot of this, and is fueling a lot of it, and I think people who maybe normally would have had their suspicions or half-formed theories, but wouldn't know too many other people who are also into this kind of stuff, and therefore it would sort of sit there in the background. Now you can find these communities very easily online, and you can feel like you're not alone, right? And so that that has made a difference. But really, I think that actually this paranoid style in American politics has actually been around for a very long time. It's not something that's new. You mentioned I think it's your first episode of Why Do You Hate Me, USA, the JFK conspiracy theorists. I think, personally, I don't know what's your favourite conspiracy theory, man. I think it's not unreasonable to ask whether the American state has in fact revealed all there is to know about Lee Harvey Oswald and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I think the answer to that is no, right? So I think it's clear that there are questions still to be answered, and I think it goes even further back than that. And I think it's not unreasonable to suspect that some government agencies, such as the CIA,
don't always tell you everything.
Don't always tell you
Yeah,
everything.
exactly.
In fact, they wouldn't be doing their jobs very well.
But we talk a lot about this, me and Justin, actually, because so much of it, and I think that's what's so complicated about this world and navigating it and investigating it and tracking these people down, is there's a lot of things where there is a grain of truth, or where there is something that is really understandable that people have questions about, and then they find themselves pulled deeper into theories that just don't have evidence. And I think that's important as well, because I was thinking about this when I was listening to The Coming Storm, which also I really loved, and when I was doing Why Do You Hate Me, USA, and I was thinking, a lot of this stuff is, when we're talking about conspiracy theories, all kind of defined by an absence of evidence, or stuff that we, it's not like going, well, this thing's not true, and here's why it's not true, and why do you believe this thing that's not true? It's much more complicated than that. And the jumping off for Why Do You Hate Me, USA, the first episode, zooms it right forward to the assassination attempt that happened in July on Donald Trump, and this tidal wave on social media of disinformation, speculation, genuine questions, conspiracy theories. And what I think is really interesting, to your point, Gabriel, is the way of thinking about this stuff. Like, there would have been people who would have watched that on telly 40 years ago and thought, there's something not right here. There's something not right, like the JFK thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
they wouldn't have been in touch with each other.
Well, they wouldn't have been in touch with each other in quite the same way. And also it's that they wouldn't have necessarily been able to perhaps deepen that idea,
well,
or evolve
your algorithms,
it.
you see.
Yeah, which is kind of where the algorithms come in, which
Yeah.
is not that this stuff would not exist without social media, but this idea of social media essentially kind of turbocharging its spread and who it reaches as well.
What I thought was so interesting about your first episode, there was, what was her name?
Wild Mother.
Wild Mother and
Earth Mother,
And
I wanted
Camille.
to call it.
and Camille, and you kind of outlined their sort of opposing conspiracy theories about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in July.
So just to be clear, both of them think that it was a put-up job, that wasn't
that
an
it was
assassination.
But they both
staged,
think it was staged by Trump.
They both think the same
Yeah.
thing. This is amazing.
Yeah. And one of them is a Trump supporter and one of them isn't.
Yeah.
But they both, it's not like their conspiracy theories aren't even opposite conspiracy
No.
theories. They're the same conspiracy
Yeah, but
theories
with different goals.
with different goals. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was so fascinating.
But also, don't you think the thing that's so interesting, and I found this when I after I left, so we were in Colorado and I was hanging out with Wild Mother in this waterfall without my shoes on, which
It's
was
a
very
great
cold.
picture.
Yeah,
If
it's a good
anyone
picture.
looks online, it's there.
So I'm standing in this waterfall with Wild Mother, and she's telling me about her passions for nature and motherhood and natural medicine, and hence the Wild Mother name online. And then you've got the next stage, which is where she started posting unproven theories about stuff that's happening in the headlines.
What else is out there? Because this can't be it. We get fed a certain aspect of something or one thing or another, but we don't ever really fully realize that there's always more. And I think that really helped solidify for me the importance of doing research and seeing what else might exist out there.
So Wild Mother, as you can probably gather from what I've been saying, is someone who is no stranger to She calls it an alternative way of thinking. She's no stranger to
Crystals.
questioning this stuff. It starts with JFK's assassination and her mum having questions and being kind of brought up in that way. Camille, on the other hand, has voted Democrat for the past 15 years. She lives in Denver. She loves dogs. She had all these rescue dogs who came with her when I met her. She has never thought anything was staged in this way before. In fact, she was so strongly opposed to Trump supporters suggesting that the election was rigged in some way without the evidence to back it up, or suggesting that the pandemic was a hoax. She hated that stuff so much so, she'd be disputing it with people on Twitter.
And what was your first reaction?
Oh, that's staged. That was my first reaction because the Secret Service, if they weren't involved in some sort of staged event, A, I don't think it would have happened, and B, they would have drugged their protectee out.
Both of you have gone out of your way to say that the people you meet when you're doing these investigations are overwhelmingly very nice people, and they've just got into a way of thinking that hasn't altered their niceness, if I can put it like that, sort of day-to-day pleasantness. It's worth saying as well, isn't it? And Marianna, I'm thinking particularly, and in fact, let's listen to a bit. There's an election worker that you talked to in one of your episodes. He's called Kwong. And this, I think, to me, when I heard it, this really brings home that there are real-world effects to all of this now in the social media age that actually in previous ages there might not have been. Let's listen to Kwong.
I think as an election worker, we are kind of the front lines, right? Post the results of 2020, myself and my colleagues have been targeted with harassment, accusations of us doing nefarious things. I don't tell a lot of the public that I'm in elections unless the conversation drives it that way. I generally tell just, random strangers that I'm just in IT.
What was really quite shocking, maybe is the right word. I don't know if shocking is the right word because I probably wasn't that shocked, but most people probably would be, is that Kwong was just like, I'm this guy that works in IT. Like, I work in this election centre. So while I was in Colorado, we then went to Jefferson County and we were able to go inside the election centre and look at like how the machine that sorts the ballots out, that they fondly call HAL from Space Odyssey, which was the machine that like rebelled against its owners and stuff. We're able to go and see kind of how it works. And they are offering tours to people who send them conspiracy theories saying, come in, we'll show you how it works, because they really want people to be able to trust the system. And so people like Kwong, who never expected to find himself the subject of hate and threats, did. And I think it's worth saying as well that Camille and Wild Mother, from what I found, are not the kinds of people who would ever send abusive, threatening messages to election workers. But crucially, and Wild Mother said this really well, she said, look, I don't believe in like harassing people or sending them abusive messages. However, if you truly believe in this cause, which she does and others do, and you believe that people are complicit in some of these things, these, elaborate plots, you can understand how people reach the point where they then send threats, which obviously has a real serious impact for the workers.
Or indeed, storm the Capitol, right? If you believe that a deep state cabal has stolen your democracy, which is so vaunted in America.
All those flags, 1776.
Right. If you believe that they've stolen it, you would.
Why wouldn't you?
You would think it as your duty to go there. I think these people were told by their commander-in-chief that the election had been stolen. The commander-in-chief, that position carries with it a great deal of clout.
Do you think it will have an impact? I mean, because if Trump gets in, he'll let them all out. He calls them hostages.
Right,
doesn't
calls them hostages.
But if Kamala Harris is elected and they stay in jail, I mean, she could, I suppose, herself simply pardon them, couldn't she? I mean, but it'd be difficult to do.
I haven't heard her talking about that. On the hostages point, there's this guy that we talked to, Derek Evans. He was at the Capitol. He was a West Virginia state legislator on January the 6th, 2021, and he went there. We just have a little listen to him because he gives you a flavour of that side of the mindset.
I was a hostage.
Really?
Yeah. You kidding me? All these guys in prison right now are hostages, 100%. What do you think these people in solitary confinement in the D.C. Gulag are? We're living under more tyranny today than our founding fathers did in 1775.
You can't be serious.
You can't be serious. Our founding fathers are rolling over in their graves right now. you should do some investigating into how the Federal Reserve came about. Go look at why we pay taxes. Go look at the interest that they're making on this. Go look at who gets to decide whether we print more money or not.
So that was Derek Evans. I mean, he went to prison for 3 months, so that's a pretty lenient sentence. He pleaded guilty, said he was very sorry, and then when he came out, he was like, I was a hostage. And I'm not saying these guys are hostages, right? I'm just saying that, and obviously there's got to be some comeback from the system of justice to people who storm the Capitol when there's an election being certified. Obviously, yeah. I'm just saying there's a kind of balance there. And to your question, will it change anything? I don't know. I haven't heard Kamala Harris saying she's going to pardon these people.
No, well, she wouldn't say it now.
She wouldn't say it now, and I doubt she would do it because I think it's so kind of such a live button on the kind of polarization.
I do think when it comes to real world consequences, that there is a real one when it comes to the coming election. So if Kamala Harris wins in the Electoral College, which is of course how the election is won, you've got to get to 270 Electoral College votes. If she wins 270 to 268, and there's pressure on one particular state, you think of what happened with Georgia last time round, and the Republicans in Georgia who were responsible for counting resisted Donald Trump when he said, you've got to find me, whatever it was, 11,000 extra votes, and they resisted. But they knew that there were other states where votes would also have to be found. I think there is a real question, if it comes down genuinely to one state that throws it one way or the other this time round, whether the pressure, not just from Trump, who won't be in the White House making the call, but will undoubtedly be making the call, but actually from all these radicalized, potentially violent people right across the country, and you're the election official, the chief election official in that state. What are you going to do? Are you going to say, maybe we should hold the election again? Maybe we send a different slate of electoral. All of those pressures, I think, become potentially much bigger this time.
And if you think about who was the central figure on January the 6th last time around, it was Mike Pence, because he was the vice president. Who's the vice president this time around? It's Kamala Harris. It's the woman who's running to be president, right? So all sorts of potential problems. I don't want to be in the business of predicting violence, but you rightly point out that millions, tens of millions probably, of Americans believe that their election was stolen last time. If Trump loses, I think we can safely say that he probably won't accept it. I think, that every indication is that he won't. Why would he? He didn't last time. So then you will have a situation where you have a bunch of people, a large number of people who believe that their election has been stolen for the second time round. And when people think that they can't change their leaders at the ballot box, leaders who, by the way, some of them think are deeply, deeply corrupt, if not criminal, then they start thinking of other ways to change those leaders.
Isn't there a kind of, because I totally agree. I mean, you can just see this situation where there are people who genuinely believe these ideas and feel incredibly wronged by whatever happens in November and decide to take matters into their own hands, possibly.
Because powerless as well.
Exactly, because they feel like no one's listening to them and people don't care what they think and they can't make their voices heard.
Their vote doesn't count.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, when I was in the election centre, the level of security, this is a small little election centre in Jefferson County. It's kind of like some sort of, it's like a concrete building, and we go underground into this basement. Obviously, the main reason it's secure is to protect the votes, to ensure that the vote is fair and that there's no problems with anyone kind of tampering with that process. But there's also this level of security, it's like beeping through the things they check about the election workers, trying to boost morale. Amanda Gonzalez, who I was speaking to, who's the in charge essentially of overseeing the count, she has come up with a plan. If something bad happens, can she stay at her friend's house, or how does she make sure that she's safe and something terrible doesn't happen to her? But then you've got people like Kwong, who we heard from, who they are like your average person who's just decided that this is the job they want to do. And then you've got the poll workers who volunteer, who are people who are not, elected politicians. And it's worth saying as well, though, and the flip side of this is, say in another universe, so say it's not Kamala Harris that wins in a really tightly fought race, but actually Donald Trump wins. We've now seen 2 incidents of what the FBI are calling political violence against Donald Trump. What does that mean for an extreme minority of people who really, 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 really hate Donald Trump? What do they try and do?
Let's just turn on to the future then of American democracy, this kind of sense of whether it's already lost or what it is that maybe brings it back. And actually, we've had an email that kind of fits into this rather well. So it's an email from someone doing her A-levels. It's from Florence. It says, I'm doing my A-levels. I'm writing my EPQ, which is the extended project qualification, around the title, Patriotism, divides us more than it unites us. I'd love to know your opinion, she says, on this, especially in American politics. And it seems to me that one of the things that is missing, well, it doesn't just seem to me, it seems to a lot of Americans, that one of the things that is missing is the patriotism that says, you know what, and Dick Cheney referenced this recently, Dick Cheney, who worked for George W. Bush, and now says he's going to vote for Kamala Harris, that in spite of our massive differences, which it's a good thing to have, we need to have the patriotism that says the system, the Constitution, typically in America, this revered document, even if we disagree a bit about what it actually means, we still think the thing itself and the American project and America as an idea in the world is worth holding to, fighting for, believing in. And that kind of, so, you know, to answer that project extended project qualification answer, patriotism divides us more than it unites us. Well, that aspect of it is meant to unite and has in the past united. But I wonder if it does now.
Well, because it doesn't. Florence is quite right. If that indeed is her, well, she's asking the question. I would say people are looking at each other in a sort of distorted mirror, really. And they both kind of have the same critiques of the problems that the system faces. And really, when we look at all these conspiracy theories, it's a message from society that says that so many people are feeling like there's something wrong with the system, right? That's basically what the conspiracy theories tell you. In episode 3 of The Coming Storm, it's a kind of episode of 2 parts. We go to Idaho and we meet these kind of traditional Republicans who are trying to stop their party being taken over by conspiracy theorists. And they're talking about these guys, the conspiracy theorists who believe that, you know, democracy is a facade and it's been taken over by evil hands and behind the scenes, hidden hands are pulling the strings. They're saying, you know, these people just want to burn it all down. They want to burn down the system. And then we meet this guy, Eric Parker, who's a militia leader. Again, super friendly guy and actually quite reasonable when you talk to him. But he says, you've got this all the wrong way around. It's not us that are trying to burn it all down. Yes. It's that lot. We are trying to save America. Yeah. And he specifically
and they're using the language
the Constitution.
The language,
the Constitution,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's almost like these two halves of America are staring at each other through the looking glass, and guns drawn, right? And they see in each other the threat, and it's almost like symmetry.
And I think it's really important what you say about how this feels as though it's a symptom of the system not working and not working for some people. Because actually, to this point about how we keep kind of saying, oh, you know, this person was really lovely to chat to, or this person was, you know, really nice, and not any of the stereotypes you might think about people that believe conspiracy theories, or at least not all of them, or, you know, all of that kinds of stuff. This idea of like us and them, oh, I couldn't possibly believe this, but they would, sort of thing. It is just wrong and not how it works. But actually, I think what's important here is like these people help us to better understand what's unfolding here and why people believe it and how. But it's not that they like, it's sort of like a bit like whack-a-mole, or like putting a plaster on something. You're not going to fix it by saying, right, you did this thing and you're going to go to prison for years.
You're going to prison and here are the facts and that's an end.
And that's the truth. That's not going to work.
In a sense, and I think this is where kind of your beat and the rabbit hole that I've ended up in is slightly different. In a sense that disinformation obviously is a problem, and it's a problem for our shared sense of reality, which is a problem for society and all of that. But in another sense, I kind of take the view that actually, okay, I can go onto Twitter, X, and I can see all these crazy conspiracy theories. They're out there in the open. And it's a good thing that they're out there in the open, because I can see now what is happening. It's not beneath the surface anymore. It's there. And we can see what's happening, and we can look at it and ask, what does it mean? And I think often with people who are deep in the rabbit hole, as you all know, fact-checking is totally...
It's redundant.
It's completely redundant. It doesn't work.
I've said this to
It's
you so many
counterproductive.
times. Like, fact-checking is, on its own at least, completely counterproductive. And even then, it's like, how much is it reaching any of the people that would ever trust or believe what it's saying? Probably not.
What I think is important is to treat people who believe what to us seem objectively crazy things, to treat them as you always do, which I think is great in your with respect and understanding, and trying to sort of really listen to them. And I think if there is some kind of way of getting out of this awful divide that America's in, but I think we're also getting into here in the UK, it's that. It's not to be kind of tribal about it. It's to listen to people and go, okay, I don't believe any of that, but I hear you, and I think I understand where you're coming from.
Let's bring it back finally to America. We've made it very clear that a Trump victory has all the potential problems that people who are opposed to Trump say that there might be, and we don't know the extent to which democracy would be threatened if he won again, but plainly there are potential threats down the line. I've suggested, and I think we're all agreed, that a Kamala Harris victory by a couple of electoral college votes would also potentially be quite a difficult moment for American democracy. I just wonder, Gabriel, what if Kamala Harris blows this one away and wins really easily? In those circumstances, is it all
Problem solved.
We're all
go
problem
home.
solved, home free, or what?
I mean, well, number one, I don't think that's going to happen, judging by the polls. The polls can be very wrong, as we know from 2016, but judging by the polls, everything indicates that it's going to be very tight.
Yeah. Although just to come back on that, yes, it can be very tight, but you can still win all of the swing states together, the 6 or 7 swing states. So actually in the electoral college, I suppose, it could still be, 30 or 40 electoral college votes.
I'm just going to put myself into Donald Trump's mind, right? This is a man who is easily triggered by comments about his crowd sizes, right? If he loses, what's he going to react more viscerally to? If he loses by a narrow margin or if he loses by a big margin? I think, if he loses by a big margin, he's going to double down on this is stolen, right? He's not going to be able to handle that. This is the man who, when Kamala Harris obviously very deliberately needled him about his crowds at his rallies, pivoted to they're eating the dogs. He's not going to react well.
You sound uncannily like him.
I thought that was Trump in the room.
Thank you. So I think either way, a Kamala Harris victory is going to be a testing time, if it happens, is going to be a testing time for millions of Americans' faith in their democracy, unless Donald Trump has what would appear to be a change of character and goes, do you know what? American democracy is more important. I lost. Well done. We live to fight another day, or I'm going to retire and play golf in Bedminster.
Right, that's it. Before we go, thanks to Gabriel.
Thank you for having me.
Real pleasure to have you, and we will talk again almost certainly in the future. That is it from us. If you want to get in touch, you are most welcome. 44330-123-9480. It's Americast@bbc.co.uk. The hashtag is Americast.
You can send us your questions on Discord. The link to our server is in the description. And you can hear Americast first and in full as a podcast on BBC Sounds. See y'all later.
Americast from BBC News.
Thanks for listening to Americast from BBC News. You can subscribe to this podcast on the free BBC Sounds app, which is now available worldwide.